Welcome, everybody. We are live with our Building Your Brand Through Employees, the Salesforce Way live session. Thank you, everybody, so much for joining. I know we took a month off there with Smart Live sessions, but now back in full swing with a really cool one to hear about how Salesforce does things on their end. Before we get started with the session, of course, one thing that we like to do with all of our live sessions is to see where people are calling in from. So you'll see on the right-hand side of your screen, you have a little questions tab. Go ahead and write in there where you're calling in from. We like to see all the different places that people are tuning in from. Oh, it looks like we have the chat tab here as well. So we're seeing Mexico, Amsterdam, Berlin, Estonia, Germany, Tampere, Columbus, Ohio. All right, so we have a good broad audience here. But yeah, today we're going to be talking all about employer branding and brand awareness building, and specifically focusing on how Salesforce does it. And to do that, I would like to introduce our guest of honor. We have Jesse here from Salesforce. Thank you so much for joining. I know you're based on the West Coast, so a bit of an early morning for you. So thanks for getting up for this. And yeah, maybe you could start off, give a few words on who you are, what you're all about, and how you're doing this morning.
Yeah, totally. Thanks for having me. I'm Jesse Sacks-Hoppenfeld. Like Alex said, I live in San Francisco and work for Salesforce. Been working at Salesforce a little over 2.5 years. Actually, I see my boss Marissa on the call. We had a realization last week that I've actually been at Salesforce I've been working at Salesforce longer, during the pandemic or working from home than in person at this point, which is crazy. But excited to join you all. Always excited to talk about employee advocacy, the social ambassador program. So pumped to be here, and hopefully can answer some of your questions.
Awesome. Thanks so much for that. And yeah, I think that's probably a common theme for a lot of people these days. They've been working at their respective companies for, a longer period of time has been during the pandemic, and working from home, working hybrid, what have you, than actually being in the office. But yeah, good to have you here. Thank you so much for joining. For you all for all our joiners, in case you don't know me, I am Alex, marketing director here at Smart. Do a lot of things, but amongst all of them, love hosting a lot of our live sessions. And yeah, I'm based out of Helsinki. Jesse's based out of San Francisco, and we see people across the board. We're seeing Lisbon. Marissa's shouting out that Jesse is amazing. So that's good news, Jesse. We have Brooklyn, Lisbon, London, Denmark, Stockholm, South Africa, Texas, Espoo, Finland representing. We have a truly global audience here. So thank you so much, everybody, for joining. Before we get into the actual topics and questions that we'll be covering, just a brief bit of housekeeping. So we'll be covering 5 specific questions related to the way Salesforce builds brand awareness. All will be kind of relating to this, what Jesse already alluded to, the concept of employee advocacy. So getting your employees involved in your social media strategy and having them be your social brand ambassadors. We will be doing QA throughout the session. So at any point, again, you have a few tabs there. You have chat and you have questions. So if you have any questions, feel free to drop them in either tab. I'll be picking those up and posing them to Jesse as they make sense. But we also have a little bit of time at the end in case we want to do some live Q&A at the end as well. But again, feel free to drop your questions in at any point. All right. And yes, there's also Indonesia. So we have Asia representation as well. Great. We have like across the board now. We're in all time zones. All right. But with that, I think we can go ahead and get into it and start off with our first kind of planned question for this session, which reads, what is the role of employees in building the Salesforce brand? Now, we kind of touched on this, having employees be brand advocates, sharing your content, sharing your message with their networks. But Jesse, maybe you can elaborate a little bit on what the role of employees is when building the Salesforce brand.
Yeah, totally. I think I want to start that like contextually by talking about where kind of we sit on the marketing team at Salesforce. I think that's helpful because we kind of talk about it a lot internally, in that employee advocacy really can support sales teams, marketing teams, recruiting teams, and everybody in between. However, kind of the team that I sit on is Salesforce's social media team. And we really focus on content, channels, and customer marketing, with a real focus on building brand awareness. So kind of generally speaking, a lot of folks around the world, recognize the Salesforce cloud. They may recognize the towers that we have in cities throughout the world. But there's still kind of this underlying question that folks aren't necessarily able to answer, which is, what does Salesforce do? What is Salesforce? So as a result, that's kind of, the question that our team, as well as many other teams in the organization, are kind of tasked to handle. So given that context, we are leveraging employee advocacy to hopefully kind of, help answer that question for the masses. So kind of as a result, kind of the role of employees, we really kind of have focused and view our ambassador program, or our employee advocacy program, as a value exchange, really, between the Salesforce brand and our employees. Sorry, Alex, I don't know if you're gonna say something.
No. I'm listening with a keen ear.
Cool. Yeah. So along the lines of that, value exchange, kind of at the brand level, Salesforce, we're providing our employees with the resources, the frameworks, really kind of in the shape of content, the latest and greatest Salesforce content. All employees that work at Salesforce are experts in whatever field or industry that they work in. So we really want to kind of highlight that credibility. We want to provide them with the resources, the content, so that they can, bring that IRL credibility, if you will, and turn it into like a personal and professional brand on social media. So as a result, kind of in return for, helping employees build up their own social brands, Salesforce is able to leverage those networks and reach customers, prospects, leads, even recruits in a truly authentic way that kind of, brand on brand, or, Salesforce talking about Salesforce isn't necessarily able to accomplish.
Right. So, and you mentioned something there, like in terms of authenticity, like having employees speak about your brand rather than maybe a branded account speaking about your brand. Obviously, I guess, for Salesforce, I don't know, have you noticed that having that authenticity factor, does it make those messages maybe land better?
Yeah, I think it depends on, the type of content, the type of message. We see both kind of really broad messages on our advocacy program perform really well. Stuff like brand announcements, the company's values kind of in relation to things happening in the world, big Salesforce being the best place to work type of awards. But then we also see more niche content perform really well. It's kind of, if the right person shares it to the right audience and gets it in front of the right people, we oftentimes see, individual shares from credible folks drive just as much traffic, if not more traffic, than kind of branded accounts. Again, all dependent on the type of content and who they're reaching.
Yeah. 100%. And that's interesting. You can see individuals maybe even driving more traffic than in at least in some cases than branded accounts. You also mentioned this concept of value exchange, and you touched upon employees being able to build their own brand. Is there something else, like what really is in it for the employees to kind of be a part of this type of social ambassador program?
Yeah, I think that kind of, from at the highest level, we see people that participate in the program kind of once they like build up their own cadence and frequency of regularly posting and sharing and participating in kind of a social conversation. We see that folks that are using our social ambassador program see their networks grow by 3 times the rate as kind of prior to joining the program. And they also see 6 times the profile views. So like real tangible, you're increasing your network, you're getting your profile in front of more people. And that's like, completely regardless of whatever kind of social metrics that you may be growing over time. The more you share, you'll probably see more engagement. You'll probably reach more people as you continue to build that up. But, more so, you're also building your network kind of besides, maybe what somebody may deem like a vanity metric on social.
Right. And that's super cool. Like you even had some, I guess, I don't know how hard and scientific the numbers are, but like mentioning that you get, the networks tend to grow at 3 times the rate, or profile, there tends to be 6 times the profile views. Those are like really cool, like concrete numbers that obviously affect, the willingness of an employee, I guess, to participate. Yeah, I totally agree with Anna here. It's those are some pretty cool personal branding stats. And especially in the age of COVID, personal branding has, I feel, become more and more important. A lot of discourse happens online and in these social media platforms. So being able to do that, obviously, is super cool.
It's funny, even like when onboarding, I actually have a screenshot of a tweet from Alexio Hanahan in our onboarding doc. He's co-founder of Reddit. Some people know him as Serena Williams' husband. But it was just like a screenshot of a tweet he put out that was like, in 2018, all these folks were doubting me that I was wasting my time and energy on social media. And now it's 2021, and it's all of these co-founders, entrepreneurs, et cetera, reaching out to him for advice on how to build community on social. So just like, 3 years, but how, the sentiment around social selling or building a personal brand on social has changed.
Yeah, 100%. That's a pretty cool, and those, case studies, there's a lot of people that have seen a similar effect during, especially during the pandemic. There's a good question by Stephanie in the chat, but I think actually would be really well related to the next topic. So I think, Stephanie, I'll pull that up when we go on to question number 2 here, the planned question, which reads, how does Salesforce engage a global workforce with relevant content? Now, obviously, you guys, I don't know what the most current employee or headcount is at Salesforce, but it's getting to be quite large. So how do you engage a global workforce with relevant content?
Yeah, this is a great question. Like you said, Salesforce is a massive company. I believe last time I checked, there was, I think, 65,000 people that on LinkedIn self-declared they work at Salesforce. As of today, we are closing in on 11,000 registered employees using our employee advocacy program. Obviously, not close to 65,000 yet, but it's a really nice start that we're really proud of. Of those 11,000 employees, they actually are across around 40 countries worldwide. So as a result, to kind of, support these folks that may not be, speaking or sharing English content, may not be, working in industries that I'm familiar with. We've really worked to build out what we're calling kind of a global governance, local empowerment framework for how we're kind of trying to support teams that may be outside of EMEA, and they may be speaking or sharing non-English language content. Sorry.
No. So essentially, like think global, act local type of.
Yeah, exactly. A real crucial component of that is honestly finding, our internal experts in those regions, whether they know the content, the product, the vertical, the language. Really, I only speak English. I'm still figuring out English, and in high school, I guess really the only thing I learned in my foreign language class was that Google Translate is not perfect. So we've really worked to try to find as many people that can, handle that content, handle the responsibility, and work to get, the content that they're already creating out in front of folks. So really, as a result, we typically find or work with marketing teams, sales enablement teams, but really more so social media practitioners content writers, folks that are pressing publish elsewhere already.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
And we just rely on them to really own and populate their respective channels. So really today, as a result, and this number is growing, but right now we have over 300 of those channel managers,
Wow.
really supporting too many channels for us to count at this point. If they have content to support the channel, we allow them to create that channel. And, those channels, those content streams are as broad as, Salesforce's core values, like trust, security, business being the greatest platform for change. And then we get as granular as like specific products, industries, even like publications. So we differ between like the Salesforce blog and the Salesforce newsroom posts. So you can get as granular as you want with like what Salesforce domains are publishing.
Right, right. And just out of curiosity, those kind of thinking about those kind of local channel managers or kind of geography specific administrators, do you find, do those actually sit, are they marketing team members? Or do they sit across different departments, or do they mainly sit in marketing?
Yeah, that's a great question. Both, all of the above. I would say for like the more broad, high level, kind of more widely relevant content series by regions, those are for the most part marketing teams. When we get more granular, or like when we have some private channels for more specific teams, private channels for execs, as we get like more niche with the type of content that we're creating, generally we move away from marketing teams, I should say. If we're talking super low funnel content, we'll be working with sales enablement teams. And that's generally private content, right? It's like, this is super relevant to a sales team selling X product or to X industry. So it's really dependent on the content streams that we're supporting.
Sure. But that's pretty cool, right? You have different kind of, your advocacy program is almost becoming like a cross-functional effort. You have people from different parts of the business contributing, and that just builds more richness. I wanted to bring up, the question that Stephanie had here around Curated. Do you provide curated Salesforce approved content, or are employees creating themselves? So do you give employees the option to add or propose posts to the platform or to the program that you're on?
Yeah, all of the above. So I think it's maybe helpful to think of the way the content comes into the platform in a few different kind of buckets, if you will. First bucket is RSS feed enablement. So our blog, our newsroom, generally the majority of our content kind of domains exist on RSS feeds. So we work to kind of set those up. So we like to call it earned media without the lift. So our blog team knows when something gets published on the blog, it's getting proposed to be published on SMARP. Again, earned media without lift. We just want to make it as easy to kind of get into those teams' workflows as possible.
Right.
So that's stuff that's published on an RSS feed. Other than that, we have channel managers kind of independent of RSS feeds that content or curate content from all across Salesforce domains, even external domains. That was kind of like a big piece of feedback that we're still trying to figure out the best way to support. But folks have come to us and said, you have all of the latest and greatest Salesforce content, and it's awesome. But we want to be able to share some, external thought leadership as well. So we've been manually curating some stuff from, outside sources, working on finding the best way to build scale into that in kind of a brand safe way. And then the third option is employee kind of suggestions.
Right.
So we have it available for anybody using SMART, to suggest something for other folks to share. And then those 300 plus channel managers who may be responsible for 1, 2, 3 channels will go in there periodically and confirm or deny if it's appropriate kind of, for us to blast out to all Salesforce employees.
Right. Cool. So there is an approval flow built in there so that, you make sure you still have kind of a watchful pair of eyes to make sure that if people are kind of sharing it out in the name of Salesforce, that it is essentially kosher to be sharing it.
Exactly. Yeah. We've worked to set up some guardrails guardrails and onboard those channel managers to try to alleviate some concerns. Most of the concerns arise from like, a brand safety perspective. Are we promoting kind of competitor material and making it easy for employees to share that to social? Because that's, counterintuitive. Are we talking about maybe, acquisitions or brand news that employees aren't allowed to talk about yet? So for the most part, the approval process is in order to protect brand safety.
Right. And which obviously makes sense. The maybe, kind of one last thing that I wanted to ask around this is obviously with, you mentioned 300 channel managers. So it makes sense that you probably already have at least 300 channels. So that's a lot of channels. That's more than, than most people can subscribe to or handle in their own feed. Do you make any content on the platform essentially mandatory that this global workforce has to see, or is it more on a kind of preference basis?
Yeah. So yes and no. We have a single channel that's essential for every single employee. They can't unsubscribe to it. That channel is what we call smart training videos. So we have, I think we broke it down into like 8 or 9 of like the core things, like actions that you can take on the platform. And we just filmed kind of 30-second to 60-second really basic videos on like the buttons you press to accomplish X task. So that's essential. We have all of that information in like various Google Docs, Word docs. We just wanted to make it so if you have a question, you can read about it, you can listen it to the answer, you can watch it. We just want, to make these resources as available in whatever medium as possible. So smart training videos are only essential channel. Then we also have like default channels. So if we're onboarding specific teams and we just want to ensure that like the second they register, they're seeing content without having to, customize their news feed. And we just want to make sure that the first time they sign up, they're seeing stuff and it's relevant to them. So we'll set up some default channels by teams. But again, they're default. So people are able to subscribe, unsubscribe to them. It's just a nice starting point.
Right. That, nobody wants to sign up and just be greeted by an empty feed. There's actually a good question by Adam here on the time that channel managers spend approving, moderating, updating content. If you have 300 of those managers, there must be a bunch of, much more users and quite a bit of suggestions coming in. Is that a significant endeavor for them, or how does that play into their time consumption basically?
Yeah, that's part of the reason why we have so many channel managers. We recognize that, not really nobody's job description, at least at Salesforce, says employee, or I should take that back, says SMART or kind of social ambassador program. We do have employee advocacy kind of, departments. But as a result, we don't, we know nobody's waking up saying, this is my job for the day, or like, this is my core job for the day. So we want to kind of democratize the responsibility as much as possible. Like our goal is to not have kind of Alex being concerned that he's solely responsible for the health of a single channel. So oftentimes we have a handful of folks that have channel manager access to various channels at a single time, just again, to kind of alleviate any kind of added stress from, helping us serve or helping us run this program. So it really, I would say that one, it differs on the channel that people manage. Some of the bigger channels like Business as a Platform for Change, I would say 95% of our users subscribe to that. So over 10,000 people are subscribed to that channel. So, there's probably dozens of channel managers to that, all responsible for kind of, stopping in and if they see something, approving it. So I couldn't tell you necessarily, X amount of time per day or per week, just really dependent on what channel they have oversight over.
And that's like, but something you said is that's a quote I'm going to take away, which is democratizing the advocacy program and kind of making sure that you have a bunch of those trusted people helping you moderate the content. Because when you grow to the scale that your program is, it becomes it is a significant amount of proposals that you get, and democratizing it makes it a lot easier. Adam agrees with the democracy line.
Awesome.
All right, but yeah, I think we have 35 minutes left, and we still have 3 major questions to cover. There's so many good questions in the chat. Hopefully, I can pick some of them up, and they'll make sense in some of the other sections. But let's keep moving and go on to question number 3, which reads: how do you make your employees part of your social media strategy? So we talked a little bit about the reason they're involved in the social media strategy. We talked a little bit about how you distribute content to them. How do you make sure that they have that content to share? How do you engage them? How do you make sure that they want to be a part of that strategy?
Yeah, I really think about this in kind of 2 different parallel paths. The first being is just making content available. Any and all content that we create, we want it to be available to be shared. And the second is really building out room for personalization. I'll touch on this a little bit more, but we've talked about how authenticity is really key to making an ambassador program work for you. So ensuring that there is that room for personalization, I think, is super valuable. Mm-hmm. So kind of jumping into those 2 different ideas of availability and personalization. Really, when I work to onboard teams, marketing teams as our content curators, I really stress that importance of making content available. You don't know how many people are going to share it. You may get a handful of shares. You may get dozens of shares. But really, ultimately, all of that is additive, right? Nobody's paying for that media. Nobody's paying to reach those people to drive those engagements. And there's really no way to, predict what's going to necessarily resonate with folks to the point of, them sharing to their own networks. And really, ultimately, you may be surprised at what people, choose to share. I kind of touched on this a little bit earlier in terms of our top performing posts, and across the board we always see our top performing posts in terms of like employee shares, not other metrics, just the most content shared by employees. Always best place to work, whether it's like a Glassdoor thing or a Forbes article. Acquisitions, when we acquired Slack, it was one of our top performing posts. Right. Then Dreamforce and big product announcements. But like I said earlier, we also see specific people driving a lot of traffic with their one audience. So like we've seen an individual AE actually shared a newsroom article, and she drove more traffic, I think over 200 clicks to a newsroom landing page than like our entire Sales Cloud handle. So it kind of speaks to the power of employee shares and just making it available, right? Like if people can share it, it could work hard for you. If it's not available to be shared, it's not going to work at all. And then I think, the second aspect of that is personalization and, authenticity. I think that, we've all seen friends or old coworkers kind of post like really generic stuff on LinkedIn. Like, you'll scroll through your feed, you'll see a friend say something that like you cannot even picture those words coming out of their mouth. And it's really clear that, they got a Slack message with a click to tweet and they just pressed the button and it went out into the universe. And you see right through it. Everybody else sees right through it. It defeats the authenticity, the purpose of the program. And it really doesn't do anything for that individual sharing it or the brand. People are just ignoring it. Mm-hmm. So building that room for personalization, I think, goes a long way. That can be accomplished by one, educating users, like explaining to them the value of adding their own insight. But we also recognize that not everybody has the time to do that. Not everybody is even comfortable providing their own insight or sharing on social. Right. So we also kind of express the importance of that to our channel managers. If possible, provide people with several post copy options so that they don't even have to worry about it. But it ensures that, like, if 30 people share it, we at least have 2 different sets of 15 post copies and protects that authenticity a little bit. I think, an example of this is we ran a contest, a sharing contest for Team USA content during the Olympics. And we were very limited with, USOPP approvals in terms of the amount of content we could share. But we had a lot of post copy provided or approved. So we had, a single blog post and provided like 10 different pieces of post copy. It was shared over like 800 times, I want to say, to social media. So if we didn't provide all of those, post copy options, there would have been 800 employees all saying the exact same thing on LinkedIn, and really kind of defeats the purpose.
Yeah. Yeah. Then it becomes just like you see a lot of people just saying the same thing over and over again. Kind of similar issues come up in when people are just sharing post copy messages on Slack and people copy paste it in.
Yep.
One thing, actually, we've had this question, like if I talk about the SMART context for a little bit, sometimes we get that question, like, how do you avoid this from happening? And your example was one good one. You provide various post copies and you let people choose from something that's applicable to them, and then you kind of get around that issue. But another thing to highlight here is that if you as a Salesforce employee or me as a SMART employee see everybody from SMART sharing something, of course I'm going to see people sharing that post more because I'm connected to more people at the company. That's not the same for their general networks. So You're going to be able to, it turns out not being as big of an issue as some might think. There's actually a question here, again from Adam. We talked about how do you get them engaged? How do you get them to kind of engage with the program? But then how do you keep employees engaged? And I know, we've talked offline a little bit about kind of how you maybe incentivize participation. Do you have any kind of examples on maybe gamification and incentivizing employees to engage in the program?
Yeah, I kind of just alluded to it a little bit. We tested out our first kind of go at gamification, and we did that during kind of the duration of the Olympics. So from opening ceremony to closing ceremony. Salesforce, it was the first year that we were partners with Team USA. So we had, some exclusive rights to what we could talk about. So as a result, we were like, we know we have X amount of content. This is a big brand initiative. We want to drive traffic to, I think it was a handful of landing pages, Salesforce blog sites, announcements about the partnership. So that was an example of us saying, we know people are going to be interested in sharing this content, but how can we, really incentivize it and get more people that maybe wouldn't have shared Team USA content to share it? So we set up a gamification program where we provided points not only for shares, but we actually provided more points for clicks. We wanted to avoid a situation where like people were sitting there sharing 30 times and blowing up their network because they wanted a free sweatshirt.
Right.
So we incentivized clicks as well. And as a result, we drove, I wish I had it up right now. It was over 1,000 shares of Team USA content in 10 days of, the duration of the Olympics.
Right.
We drove over 2,500 clicks to those landing pages, which was awesome. Again, it was our first go at gamifying, but, it I think proved our hypothesis that providing rewards for sharing specific content works. Granted, we want to test it again because, not every piece of content we produce is going to be as awesome as Team USA stuff. So we want to test it again. Obviously, it was a bit of a unique situation and people were inclined to share that content anyways. But the test was interesting and we're fully prepared in trying out future kind of incentivizations.
Right. That's yeah. Of course, not everybody can have Team USA sponsorships and incentivize that kind of a program, but it still speaks to kind of the approach, which is pretty cool. Kind of prioritizing this was super important for the brand in a certain amount of time, and you kind of were able to prioritize and maybe enhance activity around those campaigns. Yeah, there's a question just quickly from Marin that I can handle, but I see Adam and Anita already answered. Actually, yes, Smart does have the functionality to provide a selection of messages that employees can then choose from. All right, I think in the interest of time, again, we have 2 more questions. Still a bunch of great questions in the chat. We hopefully will have some time at the end for going through a lot of those, but let's keep on moving to make sure that we get through these big ones, because question number 4 is what a lot of people are interested in, which is how does Salesforce measure the impact of these initiatives? So you talked about, you've been talking about a few things like measuring the number of shares, measuring the number of clicks. So we've, touched upon a bit of this, but maybe you could expand on how you measure the actual impact here.
Yeah, this is a bit of a tricky one, kind of just like due to the nature of employee advocacy program and the various stakeholders that we support. Some are really fluent in the media world, the paid media worlds. Others are fluent in like the newsletter world. So everybody's kind of just familiar with different metrics and use, different KPIs to judge their success. So we really differ this based on who we're reporting to, or who what content we're supporting. And again, I say that because, it's a single metric that probably isn't indicative of, performance in employee advocacy. For instance, earlier I was talking about like the content that we see the most employees share. But if we're using employee shares as a metric, the Slack acquisitions are our best post. But if we're talking about, driving, qualified clicks to more niche landing pages, then looking at overall share counts isn't, the KPI for us. So it may be more helpful to kind of look at it at like a program success level and then like a specific piece of content success level. So kind of like at like that overall program view, we look at a few different metrics. Overall seats filled. We pay for X amount of seats. How many do we have filled? And then step down from that, active users, monthly active users, daily active users. These people have signed up, but are they using the platform? Mm-hmm. And then furthermore, we kind of look at, our monthly and quarterly shares, our engagements, our clicks, and our site visits. Again, monthly, quarter over quarter, are we growing? Right. And then one other kind of number that is new to us, and we've been super excited about it. Again, kind of as I touched earlier, some stakeholders are familiar with paid media, others with newsletters or open rates. So we've worked to develop an estimated earned media value number, which has been super valuable for us. So we worked in tandem with our paid social media team to put together a range of cost per clicks from like most expensive cost per click, theoretically most qualified audience, to least expensive cost per click, least qualified audience. And we created like a weighted average there. So we were able to take that weighted, cost per click and apply it to clicks generated on SMARP. So estimated earned media value has been awesome for us in just kind of conveying overall performance. At the moment, I believe last quarter we generated $1.5 million in EEMV. Obviously proxy for, a real media value, but it was nice to see, and, program paid for itself, in a month or two. So it was cool to see that. And it's a nice number to put in front of executives and stakeholders, talk about the value of the program. But then if we're looking at like a specific content piece, right, like not like the program success level, but how is this one piece of content doing? We kind of break that down further by like how did this content perform on SMARP? Like how many people read this versus shared it? Ultimately, the goal is to get people to share content. So if they're just reading it, it's not doing anything for us. So how can we make the content more shareable, get it to more people's social medias? And then after that, how is it performing on social media? So how many shares did it get? How many engagements did it generate? Clicks, et cetera, site visits. And then with Google Analytics, we're even able to take like a step further and see, where are those site visits coming from? Is it kind of like the masses? We got dozens of people sharing this content via SMARP, and everybody maybe generated 2 or 3 clicks, or did one person drive significant traffic? I kind of referenced an example earlier, but we saw, an individual AE drive over 200 clicks to a newsroom site which was more than other, branded social accounts. So kind of diving deeper into where is that traffic coming from? Is it a person? Is it just the aggregate of our employees? I feel like I just talked for a while, but we break it down by program, success level, and then like content itself.
Right. No, I like, people are here to listen to you, not listen to me. So the more you talk, the better. But that's pretty cool to hear, because of course, we offer a kind of overall EEMV, or estimated earned media value, in the platform, but really cool to see like how kind of a granular and detailed version you generated of it for yourselves. And yeah, like those numbers, it's nice to throw those around and flex with them a little bit to see kind of what kind of impact employees actually have on building the brand and creating that brand awareness. We touched when you started off talking about measuring a little bit on kind of the seat take up, like getting people the success. Part of the success of the program is to actually have people in the program, and we've now had a few questions related to that, so maybe we can touch on those. Dima here has a question on onboarding people. Was it gradual, or did you have people just flood the platform immediately? What did that look like?
Yeah, a little bit of both. So I guess, like, for context, again, previously we used LinkedIn Elevate. LinkedIn kind of sunset the product, so we began looking for replacement solutions, kind of without all of the, annoying RFP process stuff. All that being said, we had a little over 11,000 users signed up for Elevate at the time. So initial goal was transferring those users from Elevate to the Smart program and getting them up and running. While we went through that process, we realized that 11,000 number was super out of date. The amount of email bounce backs I got out of offices, no longer work at the company type of stuff, was really outrageous. So we learned fast that that number of Elevate users was out of date. But all that being said, first kind of goal was, let's get our super users from LinkedIn Elevate over to Smart. Let's get them using, let's get their feedback. Let's make sure this works for them. Second tier was, let's get new users that may not be familiar with Elevate, but they're interested in the social ambassador program, or interested in sharing already. So that was more of like a boots on the ground, let's cold reach out to folks. And then the third effort was just getting in front of like all hands or team meetings. So trying to leverage kind of different people's relationships with team leaders to just get in front of their teams. Oftentimes we see just presenting to folks, like, people will register during an onboarding presentation. So it's nice to kind of, just get in front of people. So was it gradual? Was it straight away? I would say our super users that were gung-ho about the program, it was straight away. They didn't need much convincing. It was like, we've moved the program over. It's better now. They signed up. Other groups kind of needed more hand-holding.
Right. And do you, like, speaking of the hand-holding, did you kind of notice any difference in those groups? Like, just thinking of how we're going slightly off topic on the measurement question, but getting different groups to kind of join and start using the platform, were there any differences, like notable differences there?
Yeah, I see what you're doing here, Alex. You're kind of leading me to the next question here. But yeah, we definitely saw like a clear line in one regions. Folks in EMEA are far more, and I don't want to speak for every company, but at Salesforce, at least, I'm very confident saying that folks in EMEA are, let's say, more willing or interested or bought into employee advocacy and social selling. Not only compared to AMER, but compared to LATAM and APAC as well. Mm-hmm. We've seen the most kind of, willingness to jump right in EMEA. More pushback in AMER, I would say, specifically on sales teams side. I think there's just more of a kind of a concentration in terms of, we want to limit second screen times. We want to optimize every second in people's days. We want to make sure that they're not hands on keyboard too much, just like a lot of thought process into specific sales teams, bandwidth and workflows. So that has been a little bit of an interesting kind of dynamic, just, difference, between what's happening on the east and west side of the Atlantic Ocean has been interesting.
Right. Well, I don't want to steal your thunder too much from the last question, so we can keep digging on the measurement a little bit. And one thing I wanted to take it back to just a little, because you also mentioned Google Analytics. So you're taking the analytics out of essentially the native analytics and looking at them in unison with Google Analytics. And what were the kind of, I think you touched upon this a little bit, but are you primarily looking at stuff like site visits, or are you also looking at stuff like conversions, or how far have you taken it in like outside of the native reporting?
Yeah, really, it differs by teams reporting. So like whatever content team is reporting on the performance of their content series, and SMARP shares being a component of their promotion. So really dependent on like a content by content basis on just like how teams are typically reporting. I would say across the board, we really look at site visits, time spent, second clicks,
right,
etc. And then, again, if somebody else is diagnosing differently, they'll do it as such. I would say like one big kind of component of our advocacy program that we're working on building out more is kind of making it an internal go-to for gated content. It's kind of just been like a mandate across the board for us from an organic social perspective, that like at Salesforce won't share gated content. We just think that it's counter to, social media norms. We don't want people to be clicking on it and asking for an email, and then, they're not giving us an email. They'll get out of it and they'll, scroll through their feed some more. We just don't think it's the right experience. We respect the time of our audience maybe a little bit more than other brands. So as a result, teams haven't stopped creating gated content because, teams need to fill seats, need to generate ACV. So we've worked to redirect folks, instead of coming to us to publish your gated content, your webinar on Salesforce, at Salesforce on Twitter or LinkedIn, let's get it on SMARP. Let's make it available for employees to share, and we can fill your webinar or gated link seats that way. So that's been a huge transition for us from a Google Analytics perspective. That being said, I don't have that much insight personally into that performance, again, because we on our team are very much the antithesis of gated content, but we want to be good stakeholders and support, our teams throughout the organization.
Yeah, but that's super cool. I mean, already like taking that approach and like having a clear strategy around gated versus ungated content. I've spoken to tons of Salesforce people, and I've heard the mentality around going full ungated, something that we more and more tend to lean towards, I guess, as an industry, or as a kind of like software companies in general are moving that way, but not everybody is quite as far as Salesforce. All right. I think we have about 10 minutes left. So let's go ahead and go to the last question. We already, I hope I didn't steal your thunder too much, because we touched upon part of what I know you plan to talk about here, but it's around your learnings. So all things equal, if you were to start a new employee advocacy program from the ground up, from zero today, what would you do? What would you do differently, maybe?
Yeah, this is an interesting one, and like you said, I kind of touched on this a little bit, but I think my answer here is really rooted in that kind of difference that we've noticed between kind of sentiment in EMEA versus AMER regarding employee advocacy and social selling. And I think, really the actions we took were a result of learnings from LinkedIn Elevate. With Elevate, we weren't necessarily able to support our regional and non-English language teams as well as we were content coming out of AMER. For instance, we had a couple hundred channels for English language content, as granular as like MuleSoft versus MAE industry. But then we had like a singular Netherlands channel, all Dutch content lived in one place and had no granularity. And people asked, like, how can we build out more granularity? And we weren't able to support them. And then Smart came along and we were able to support them. So we kind of dove head first and we were like, we can help you guys now. Let's get you all set up with as much granularity as you want. And we dove into supporting folks in EMEA and kind of took like the not standard sale. Like very often at Salesforce, there's a concentration on HQ and EMEA, and then we, enable everybody else. And we may have kind of gotten out ahead of our skis a little bit and wanted to be kind of the best partners we could and helped everybody equally. But as I said, we've seen, EMEA was way more happy to jump in and participate than EMEA. So I think looking back on it, we would have kind of leveled the scales kind of back to the Salesforce norm, if you will, and leaned more heavily on the teams in EMEA, just knowing that they needed a little bit more convincing. I don't want to say hand-holding. I think convincing is more of the word. Whereas EMEA was just like, give us the tool, we got it.
That's awesome. Just let us run with it. Do you? I guess I don't know. Do you have any hypotheses maybe on why there was such a stark difference between, or like a difference between these geographies? I'm sure that there are a bunch of other people running global advocacy programs, and maybe they're seeing the same things. I don't know if you have any kind of hypotheses or answers as to why.
Yeah, we've kind of noodled on this a bunch internally. I have a few hypotheses. I'm no like expert in like geopolitical things, but a few ideas we have are like, one, it may be a result of like GDPR and security restrictions in EMEA. Right. We don't have the same level of restrictions in the States. It may also be a result of kind of the selling climate, potentially EMEA being more of a transactional type of sales process, and EMEA being more relationship focused. We think it may also be kind of a result of the size of companies, less Fortune 500 companies in EMEA. It may be, a combination of all of the above. It may be none of the above. But we have a few ideas to try to retroactively explain our findings. I don't know if those, encompass it, but some hypotheses.
Right, but at least kind of working, and Stephanie actually pointed out there, which I'm just responding to, the working councils in Germany. Obviously, different types of geographies require different types of approaches. So, but it's cool. Okay, and now obviously with your experience in running it in a global fashion, it's cool to hear kind of what maybe people can expect when they're launching their own programs.
Totally.
Yeah, there are a few more questions here, actually a little related to what we just discussed, from Adam again, and we were talking kind of is pretty close to what we were talking just now. But obviously, Salesforce is a digital first company. I think was the original Salesforce slogan was like no, is it software only or something? They decided to go full.
Yeah, Stassy. Yeah.
The old school. So been at it for a long time. So being a digital first company, and this is obviously a digital first initiative, what was for Salesforce? What was the biggest hurdle to get sign off to do something like this?
Yeah. I would say that, like, at least for us, sign off wasn't necessarily an issue. I don't know if Marissa's still on this call, but she's an awesome advocate, and kind of leaders that we report into saw the value of it. So I would say that sign off necessarily wasn't an issue. There are just, I guess, some difficulties that arise from working at a cruise ship of a company that may not be able to turn very fast. So going through trust and security processes probably take longer for us than they do other companies. So I would say stuff like that kind of behind the scenes just is, I think, more difficult, intuitive, or like because of the size of the company. But sign off was thankfully not an issue. And I think that, in general, social being such a data rich environment, I think you can kind of paint a picture in whatever way you're looking for to get that ultimate sign off if that is an issue.
Right. And I love having Marissa also chime in the chat. Marissa, I'm about to invite you up on stage. If you keep typing. No, I'm just joking. Keep typing. Maybe, and like a little similar then, like if given that sign off wasn't that big of an issue, were there any hurdles to getting the program off the ground? Like what was the hardest thing then in the whole process?
Yeah, I think first and foremost, content. The program doesn't work if you don't have the content. And it's not only like finding the content, it's finding the people that are able to provide post copy, and working to really, break down that content into relevant and as mutually exclusive as possible channels. Like the organization is really critical. I couldn't tell you how many iterations of channel structures we went through to try to both encapsulate the content that we have available, but also like plan for requests for new channels. So I would say like finding the content, but also building the governance to make sure that like we can scale this to support groups or regions everywhere, and not make this a headache. Like we want the UX to be as seamless as possible. Kind of mentioned it earlier in terms of like when somebody registers, I want content there for them.
Right.
I also want it to be clean, right? Like we don't want you to go in, customize your newsfeed, have a headache immediately, and get out of the program and not sign back in. So I would say content organization is like as crucial as it comes.
Yeah, and we've touched upon a bunch of the things like earlier that make that possible. Essentially, that kind of maybe that global administration, but ability to also distribute locally. So the think global, act local approach, being able to have people responsible for content in a number of different situations, because a single person or a single team can't handle the scale that Salesforce works with. There's actually a question, and now I think we've covered this question for quite a bit. We have just 3 minutes here, so we do have time for a few more extra questions. And the one I wanted to throw out, which was kind of again a little related to what we just discussed, was a question earlier posed by, I think it was Vivian, around choosing who your channel managers are. And I know we talked a little bit about, subject matter expertise, location. What other kind of factors went into kind of choosing is a person essentially able to be a channel manager?
Yeah, first and foremost, have they raised their hand? Oftentimes people come to us and say, I've heard about SMARP either from an individual standpoint, I want to share content to my own channels, or like I'm on a marketing team and we're looking to get as much legs out of our content as possible. So somebody raises their hand and they're like, I want to be a channel manager. We're like, yeah, you can be a channel manager. There is some more conversations that go into that, kind of like, do you have the content to support this? Do you have the time to support this, et cetera? And then we kind of go over the guardrails of what can and can't be shared. But first and foremost, have they raised their hand? I've kind of talked about this earlier in terms of nobody's job description at Salesforce necessarily says SMARP. Mine doesn't. So we want to make sure that people want to do this. And we kind of bring it back to the value exchange aspect. Like I go to folks and I'm like, your content's already on SMARP. It's already ending up there. Nobody's taking, credit for the performance of your content. You might as well do it. I report on the success at the highest level. This is how many seats we have. This is how we're performing. But there are clicks to be had. There's engagements to be had. Come in, share your content, and add this to your reports. So 1, do you raise your hand? 2, do you need more metrics, for your own content marketing?
Right. Right. I love that. So it's kind of, it's almost like it's a pull or like a pull type of situation where people raise their hands. They want to do it. They're willing to do it. And that goes to show, the type of program you guys are running. It's so engaging that you have people willing to raise their hand
Yeah,
and
we
step in.
also kind of try to talk about it. We sometimes we try to Trojan horse some teams, if you will. So like me and Marissa were talking about this, how we want to get, Slack is a big initiative for the brand.
Mhm.
And we've talked about this. Bandwidth is difficult. Finding resources to support channels is difficult. So we've kind of taken it upon ourselves, like, we can't build scale into myself and a few others, curating all Slack content. But if we can get Slack content into the program and prove, that we're driving traffic, we can Trojan horse it. The Slack team will go to their Google Analytics. They'll be like, wow, where is this traffic coming from? This didn't exist last month. And then they can find the resources to support. So one, we try to get people to raise their hands to participate. And two, we try to go roundabout and make them see the value, even if they weren't seeing it to begin with.
Right. I love it. I love that approach. They won't be able to resist the traffic and the value. All right, but I think we're at the top of the hour. So with that, I would like to just say thank you. Thank you everybody for tuning in. Thank you, Jesse, so much for joining, sharing your wisdom. Really, like the program you guys are running is pretty amazing, and we love seeing how you guys are doing it. So thank you so much for shedding some insight with our audience today. Maybe Jesse, I don't know, before we go, is there any kind of last words of wisdom you'd like to give to everybody in the audience?
No, I think that's all for me. I would just say, always super excited and happy to talk about employee advocacy. And connecting with folks who are doing this at companies themselves. Always excited to share feedback, to learn from what everybody else is doing. So please, if you're interested in connecting or kind of sharing insights that you've seen in your own kind of day-to-day, I'm more than happy to connect and continue this conversation about employee advocacy.
Right. And so what you heard it right there. Jesse's contact information is on the screen, mine as well. And of course, if you want to learn a little bit more about SMARP and the types of employee communications and advocacy programs that we support and the platform that we offer, feel free to drop us a message as well. But with that, thanks everybody for joining, and we look forward to seeing you at the next one.